Welcome, everyone. We'll be just give me a minute till we get people signed on here, and then we will begin today's webinar. And Tree, I forgot to ask, did you want to do questions as they come up or at the end?
Sorry, I was muted. We could do them as they come up, and both. I'm going to open it up to actually prompt some questions, some discussion.
Great. Well, good afternoon, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. It's 1:03 p.m. First of all, I want to thank everyone for being here today. My name is Jim Hott, and I work with the Maryland Center for School Safety in training and certification, as well as the Western Region representative and the conference, the annual summer conference chairman as well. So I do want to, since this is a conference lead in, I thought I heard somebody out there say conference. What conference? So I thought I would talk about the conference really quickly. I know you've probably getting a lot of emails from us. But we have the conference on July 19th and 20th. It'll be held at the Turf Valley Resort. It is free to attend. Please register today. This will be our largest conference that we have participated in. We have over 500 attendees right now. It's going to be a very exciting location. We have some great speakers to include Bernie James, a school of law expert from Pepperdine University. We have the I Love You Guys Foundation there. We have classes on digital threat assessment, the fentanyl epidemic, school culture, school mental health, restorative approaches. To include bullying, human trafficking, and then supporting students with threat assessments, also emergency plan planning. So please attend if you can, and sign up as quick as possible. You see the QR code on your screen. So again, thank you for joining us today. And without further ado, I'm going to introduce our speaker today. I met Teresa Tree Beckman back in Philadelphia in January. I was attending another conference. I went to both of her sessions. After the first one, I couldn't wait to get to the second one. I thought she did a great job. And I knew as soon as I was listening to her that she would be perfect for our audience. So I can proudly say that she's also a fellow Ted Lasso fan. We've talked about that in the past. I was actually hoping to have her present at our conference this year, but our schedules didn't work out. She was already booked. So she actually suggested that we do this as a free session for our conference lead-in. So I'm not going to take any more time. I just want to thank her personally for being here. And Tree, I'll let you introduce yourself and we can go ahead and get started.
All right, that sounds good. I'm going to try to share my screen here in a way that allows me to both see what's going on and present. So just bear with me for a hot second. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Yeah, we can.
Great.
Yes.
Perfect. Now I'm going to push this over there. All right. Well, welcome everybody. I'm just going to go real quick through my background. I actually was an athletic coach. I was a volleyball coach for many years, 21 years. And I've been out of on-court coaching since 2015. So for the last 8 years, I work with schools. I do like PD I just actually got off a call with a high school principal just before we were here. I work with some corporations in their leadership teams. And I sort of now, after my coaching career, I get to live in this Venn diagram between culture and what that looks like and what that actually is in a functional way. So team culture, both sport and non-sport. I think any group of people trying to achieve a goal, I would say that that's a team that has a culture. Whether they want to have it or not, a culture forms. It's just a kind of environment that formulates over time. So that's part of it. And in addition to that, the other part of the Venn diagram, I work and teach and speak on the speaking team for Growing Leaders Incorporated. It's a nonprofit based out of Atlanta, Georgia. And that is a social and emotional learning company. It's a nonprofit. We do some team athletic stuff, and that's how I originally got sort of connected with them. And they're generational experts. The founder and president is Dr. Tim Elmore, and he's one of the leading voices on connecting generations. And I saw him shortly after my stint at Central Michigan University, and I thought every coach, every leader in the world kind of needs this stuff. And so I sort of hung out in their break room until they let me on the team. And then in addition to that, I also do a lot of leadership development. So I live in that Venn diagram between team culture, generational understanding and connection, and leadership development. As you can see here, all of my coaching background is in Michigan, and I'm currently in Michigan. I live in Big Rapids, Michigan, which is about an hour north of Grand Rapids and an hour from the coast, Lake Michigan. And it was while I was at, I think between the time I went from Central to Western. If you're from this area at all, that's like a thing that they're rivals. But somehow they welcomed me at Western Michigan University with open arms, and that was great. But when it was at Central Michigan, I remember feeling, and hopefully these videos play, Jim, let me know if it doesn't. I'm going to give you a kind of a video representation of how it started to feel for me really quickly with my student athletes.
Do you understand the words that are coming out of my mouth?
And I mean, when I do that in a room, usually there's like muffled giggles. And I'll tell you, when I share that with students and student athletes, they actually laugh a lot harder because they 100% feel as if sometimes their teachers and coaches cannot understand the words that are coming out of their mouth. And I think that sort of sets us up for this thing that I think is one of the biggest problems in connecting and understanding and leading across generations. If you can't communicate, if we can't understand the words that are coming out of each other's mouths, it's really hard to build trust. And connecting generations, back to team culture for a second, culture, absolutely. The one thing that touches every single part of culture is trust. And like I already sort of alluded to, culture is in every group, every classroom, every school, every McDonald's, everybody has a culture. So the choice for you as a leader is not whether or not you're going to have a culture, it's whether you're going to dedicate time to being intentional about your classroom culture or your school culture. And that's extra hard right now because we are actually and the Pew Research Center has data on this, we are at the lowest trust of all time. So this is the lowest trusting environment we've been in as long as they've been tracking it. And 50% of the respondents in the youngest age group put themselves in the lowest trust category. So it's especially a low baseline level of trust with students. And I'll show you this video. I think this is a really good representation of what it sometimes can feel like when we're trying to build trust with the next generation. And Jim, you just turned your camera back on. Is it working? Perfect. Thank you.
And close your eyes and just fall down, okay? Don't worry.
Okay, then Lauren's going to catch you.
Close your eyes. Okay.
Okay, it's called the trust fall. Okay, trust fall. Ready, set, go.
And if you're around students or student athletes or, the younger generation at all trying to lead them, I think that you all can relate to this is sometimes how it feels to build trust. And so what I like to do when I'm kicking off this conversation, and I will say I do want this to be a conversation because I tend to get more energy from the room. Zoom presenting is not my favorite thing because I tend to really like to converse back and forth. So hopefully some of you are open to that because I think that the conversation is just so much more robust when I can hear from y'all. So what I want to do is I'm going to show a video. I've shown this video to tens of thousands of people. And I think it's just a really great discussion point for this whole thing that we're trying to talk about in connecting generations and creating environments that feel inspired and engaged and alive. So please bear with me. It's about a 5-minute video. I think you'll enjoy it. And it's a greenlit session for a movie that some of you may or may not have seen. So it's not the actual movie. As you watch it, I would just ask you not to only focus on the lead singer, but focus on the entire room. And I would like to have some discussion about what you observed from this room afterwards.
Benj and Justin have just written this new song called This Is Me. And we knew that it was going to be the anthem of the film, but no one had heard it before. And no one had heard Kiala sing it live. Kiala, who I didn't even want to come out from behind the music stand.
I didn't.
I kept saying to her, just step out, because this is your moment and you have to step out into the ring, metaphorically, because that's what you're doing, and you got to stand right there in front of everyone and just belt this out.
And I didn't want to. In fact, I stood behind that music stand
Yeah.
until the day of that presentation. There was a moment in the song that I actually was so scared that I had to actually grab Hugh's hand so that I had somebody to hold on to. And then we got to the end of the number, and all I remember is just deafening applause. It was a sort of otherworldly experience.
What I would do is, and I'm not going to do that because I don't think that everybody is prepared to, speak. So I don't want to send somebody to a breakout room and they're the only one there or whatever. But I would like to open this up if I could. I'm going to actually stop sharing. And I just want to talk about what you all noticed about that particular room. And we can do this one of two ways. Certainly there's the chat box. I really would love to hear some voices. I'll just start out. Kelly says in the chat, everyone became emotionally involved with the song, and there was definitely a connection. And I would agree with that. It was clear that everybody was emotionally involved. And I think that we can all agree that we want that from the students that we lead. However, at least in my experience, I know personally, and I know in my work, sometimes the first idea or the first instinct that we have as leaders is to rely on the rules and behavior influence and control to get that sort of engagement. And rules are never going to get that, right? Power over and force is never going to get that. And so what I want to do is just really talk about some of the things that we noticed from that room. The energy was contagious, to Heidi's point. And Brittany says, all it took was one person to show confidence and everyone joined in, and the group was very engaged. They were. What I want to ask you is this. Was it super engaged? Like somebody said, who said, Brittany, all it took was one person to show confidence and everyone joined in. Absolutely true. Who was that person? Somebody please, if anybody could unmute and just and jump on, I would love that.
I would say the gentleman in the burgundy sweater that in the very beginning that started singing, he was very energetic and jumped up and, had his arms going and just was deeply into the song.
Absolutely. So the guy who did the first solo off of the lead singer, absolutely. Like he kind of did it. But did anybody see her call him out? He said, she said, come, bring it. And then he brought it, right? But even before that, she had to step out behind the music stand, right? That wasn't just confidence, that took a lot of bravery. And I know that you have probably heard this by now, but like we think of vulnerability as weakness, but honestly, and this is, if you haven't consumed Dr. Brene Brown's work, absolutely look her up. She's a shame researcher. She has a huge TED Talk on vulnerability. She has a thing called Call to Courage on Netflix. Of everything she touches is gold. But she talks about this better than anybody I've ever heard. But when that lead singer, she was standing behind that music stand, what does that music stand represent? It represents armor, right? And I get why we go to work, why we go to teach our classes armored up right now. This is a really hard time to be an educator, for sure. But had she not shown the courage to walk out from behind that armor, that music stand, the song would probably be as cool as it is because they're really good performers, but it wouldn't be that magical. The magic started when she got brave and stepped out from behind the music stand. But then going back to the comment that was just made, if she steps out and that first guy doesn't like really bring it and catch her, right? When she asks him to, he caught her, basically, is what we just witnessed. She got brave and got vulnerable, and then the room caught her. And then they just built upon each other higher and higher and higher, right? The problem is it's a really scary time to come from behind the music stand. And so often we come from behind the music stand and this generation doesn't really know how to catch us. They don't know how to respond to us. And all of these things, both us staying behind our music stand and the students not catching us, all of that is born out of fear. And so let me just point back to what we all just came through, right? We all are just coming out of a time where and we feel a lot of division. And obviously there's a lot of things happening, especially in schools with shootings and violence of all kinds, right? We are coming out of this time where we were locked down. And even if the pandemic went well for you, even if everything went perfect, at the very least, it was uncertain. And uncertainty breeds fear. So a lot of the things that we're seeing when we see people, act outrageous on airplanes and, fight with the flight attendants and things like that, all of these things are fear-based. Our students are, and cancel culture has only made this worse, right? All of these things are absolutely coming from a place of fear. And so what do? We armor up even more, and we get more and more certain that our position is right. This is like, you can look through the course of evolution and see that this is absolutely a natural human response. And I will just say that certainty is the opposite of faith. Like when we feel certain, like super certain about something, we're not just displaying a whole lot of belief in something. So to Jim's point in the intro, I'm a huge Ted Lasso fan because he's talking about belief, right? And why that show like hit so big is because the big motto for that show is believe, right? And so going back to the video, that lead singer had to get really brave and she had to step out, and then the room had to catch her. And the reason that we love that video and you see the magic in that video is everybody's leaning forward. The body language is on point. And I would just suggest to you, as you can see, I'm going to go back to my screen real quick. As you can see on this screen, this is a model that I built for culture. I really do want the video panel so I can see you all. All right. This is the model that I built for culture, and it's a plug because in every single one of your classrooms and in every single school, the energy comes from the people. I don't know how to get rid of this, so we're just going to have to deal with it. The energy comes from the people that are in the room, in the school. That's where the electricity is coming to. Culture is simply building your culture, and attending to your culture means simply building something that you can use to plug into that energy, to combine it in a powerful way, in a powerful force, so that it can then power whatever it is you're trying to do, your classroom, your school, your athletic team, whatever. The hot prong in this model, and I think the most important thing that I can give you today in today's presentation, the thing that provides the juice, it's not a linear model, but this is the thing that comes first and it permeates throughout. This is the most important part of it. If you think of an actual plug, if you're not getting power to your house because a tree fell on a wire, which happens to me all the time, the hot prong doesn't suck any energy. It's incapable. There's no energy to suck. That hot prong is connection between the people. It's literally how you connect with your students and how they connect with each other. And in a second, we're going to go through a couple of points that I'm going to pull from the stuff that Growing Leaders, the data that Growing Leaders kind of compiles to sort of paint a picture for you about why that's so hard. If there's not trust, and if your students have fewer repetitions in connecting with each other and with you, the rest of your culture doesn't matter. And it's certainly not going to get better if you try to enact rules. Rules are not the answer. Doesn't mean they're not necessary. We absolutely need boundaries, but we can't go there first. So I'm going to go back to my slide deck here. I have too many screens open. It's a situation. You are all feeling this. Even if everything that the parents of your students are doing is right and perfect, even if all of that is right, the world that we live in absolutely impacts our perspective. And I just want to give you a few notes about this generation. So Generation Z, Suri wanted to be a part of this. Generation Z is who we're all dealing with right now. That's who all of you are teaching right now. They were born on or around 2001, okay? And if you think about it, there's a lot of, there's not a complete consensus around when a generation splits. So there is some wiggle room, but generally speaking, a generation changes when there's a big marker. So for Generation Z, the big marker was obviously 9/11, right? So it was around 2001, and it can be give or take. In addition to that, because technology is evolving so quickly and affecting how we communicate so much, there's a lot of micro generations. So this doesn't always apply, but certainly the way that this generation was raised was impacted by 9/11, but also technology. So I just want to get kind of into that a little bit and have some discussion around it. So the first point is, this is a generation that they don't need adults to get their information. And you're like, well, cool, because I'm a teacher and that's kind of my job. What I would say to you is this: they don't need us to get information, but they absolutely need us for interpretation. They need us for context. So this is the first generation they have. And Jim, we have somebody who's off mute. Can we fix that? I think that's probably going to be distracting to some people.
I think I took care of it.
Thank you. This is a generation that they have access to all the information in their pocket 24/7. Unfortunately, and I actually have this discussion with students and they're like, oh my gosh, you're so right. If that's true, oftentimes they get information before they're emotionally ready for it, and they get information without the full context, and they know it, but they don't really know what to do about it. And so when we stand up at the front of the classroom and just lecture and we just dump information, they're like, I could access all of this, but how does this fit into the world? So I think that we just have to, it really is important that we understand and keep that in mind, that they need us for interpretation and context as much or more than they need us for information. The second point is that they have the ability to broadcast their every thought and emotion. And that might seem annoying to older generations sometimes because they do some weird things online. But I want to just give you this perspective. If they have that ability, guess what they also have to not do? They have to not do that when they're upset. They have to not do that when they're feeling lonely. They have to not do that when they need some point of connection. And so that all takes willpower. And we know absolutely, because of years and years of studies on this, willpower is not an infinite thing. And so every single time they don't do that, they're expending some willpower and they're exhausting themselves, right? That actually creates a lot more anxiety than you think it does. This generation enjoys, we all do actually, enjoys external stimuli at our fingertips 24/7. And that's not always a good thing, right? So I would argue that the way that we interact, and I gotta stop right here and just make a note. I think technology is great. I'm in Michigan. I'm able to be with you all today, and I wasn't going to be able to be at the conference. So I can still present this information, and hopefully some of you can take at least a nugget. You're all professionals. I'm not like restating the world, but maybe one of you gets a nugget that helps you deeper connect with one student, and maybe that student would have done something really bad in school had you not made that connection, right? So technology has its really big upsides. And I also don't think that this generation as people fundamentally is any different than we were as we were kids. The difference is this: technology is evolving faster than we've been able to civilize it. And because we haven't been able to put boundaries around it and civilize it in a very healthy way, that is the issue that creates all of these things. And that really affects how they're being raised, right? So going back to the external stimuli, I would say that because of the way that we interact with technology, I think that technology is robbing us of our future poets and our future writers and our future athletes. Because if I had a phone and I would have had that ability to just sit there and play a game or whatever for however endless amounts of time when I was an adolescent, or scroll or whatever, I think that I at least I believe that I would not have played college softball. I wasn't very good. I wasn't from a very good high school, but I got bored a lot. And so I would pick up a softball and I would go and find a wall and I would throw and I would field and I would throw and I would field. And when I was bored, I would do things like that. And so I think that we need to be bored, because when we're bored, we tend to go to things that are deep in our hearts, and we find out the things that we were meant to leave in this world. And so that's an issue, right? That whole kind of resistance to ever being bored by this generation is a problem. And also, in addition to that, that's where empathy and innovation happens. So when we're bored, we have time to think about our friend that maybe we haven't talked to in a while. And, oh, I wonder how their parent is doing. I know that parent was sick or whatever. Like, that's when empathy is sort of, I don't know, created, but it's actually deepened, right? So that's a big one. This generation is in social contact at all times, but that contact is often happening in isolation. And so their relationships end up being like 10 miles wide and a centimeter deep, and they know it and they feel it, but they don't know what to do about it because they just don't have relationship building reps in the same way that we once did, right? And that one is actually, that's pretty terrifying, because as humans, we know that we're social creatures. We are hardwired for belonging. We need belonging, I would argue, less than we need water and more than we need food. Over the course of time, that seems to be about how important human belonging is. And because they're so lonely, and this is by far the loneliest generation of all time, because they're so lonely and because they're connecting shallow ways in isolation a lot, that's where we're seeing a lot of the emotional dysregulation. It's where we're finding a lot of just despair and hopelessness and lack of empathy, right? So you're feeling all of these things, but they're happening because of the way that they're set up. They're kind of set up to fail. And we know that this is true. Adults have actually enabled this generation to be narcissistic. And so that's a problem. I think that throughout the course of human history, adolescents, you tend to dip into some narcissism a little bit anyway, but they're not necessarily coming out of that in a very healthy way. And then I've already said this is the loneliest generation of all time. So for me, the biggest driver for me in the work that I do is that we all know that suicide ideation and suicide completion rate is off the charts. I will point out, just to underline this, idea that it is really affected by social media and technology, that it's up a lot. It's up a lot more in girls. And I only make this point, I think it's bad for both, but I think I'm going to make this point in this way. Typically speaking, the number one shame trigger for someone who identifies as female is body image. That's the number one shame trigger. Typically speaking, and perfectionism a little bit. For males, that or those who identify as male, that shame trigger is being weak or overly emotional or something of the like. If you look at the way that genders typically interact with their phones, and this is just all pulling from data, and I'm sort of connecting some dots here, and I could go into all of that, but just let me take some, I'm going to take some things and I'm just going to, based on my work, make some connections for you. If you think about how girls typically interact with their phones, it's compare. Boys, if we're going to keep it PG, I mean, I'm sure they do other things, but a lot of times they play video games or they watch videos or whatever. And so the shame trigger for girls is being hit every single time they're on the phone. So the suicide rate is up a lot and anxiety and depression is up a lot in all genders, right? But it's up substantially more in female genders because the shame trigger is being hit over and over and over again, right? So both are, or all genders are lonely as all get out, but one is being affected more because of that. And I just like to make that point because the answer is, and this is to take me to the next point, the answer is not let's get their phones out of their hands. And not to mention, you can't necessarily control that. And here's why that's not the answer, because down the road, how does that help them? The answer is, can we have a healthy, non-judgmental discussion with them and help them employ their own guardrails and guidelines? The American Psychological Association, this is one that I give every student that I work with. The American Psychological Association, and this is data from before the pandemic, pointed out that any of us, any age at all, anybody who is on social media for more than 2 hours a day on average is 75% more likely to exhibit one of the risk factors for suicide ideation. So in that data, there's a guardrail, right? By the way, that number has been updated and it's more like 45 minutes post-pandemic. But in there lies a guardrail, right? So if you can have a healthy discussion with your students and just underlie the point of, hey, if you're on for more than 45 minutes, or if you want to say 2 hours, you're way more likely to have these effects. So why don't we just maybe get them to be inspired to set their own guardrails? And I know this sounds like you're like, I don't live in Disneyland tree, but I'm telling you, when I have this conversation with students, it absolutely makes a difference. If I tell them you can't be on your phones in class, or you can't have your phone at school, and I play the rest of the day playing Got You, it frustrates me and it frustrates them. So I just don't think that that's very effective for this generation. So what I want to do right now is I do just want to pause and I want to open this up, and I'll bring up my chat box again, but honestly, I would really like to hear from you. I just think that provides a more robust conversation. I want to open it up to this question. On that screen, there's a few points, and I have many more about this generation, but these are ones that I see and deal with a lot. Which one sticks out to you the most? Or what thought has been generated from this last 10 minutes? Or what do you see the most?
That they're lonely, that they're surrounded by friends, but they're still alone.
Yes, absolutely. You know what's funny about that? Not funny, ironic. One of the most prevalent conversations that I'm having with athletic teams, and I think this actually applies across the board, is I will literally have athletic teams, and it doesn't matter the gender, come up and say, we have a really great culture within our team. Like, we all get along. Sometimes we struggle with our coaches, but we all get along real well. And I'm like, cool. When was your last hard conversation? And they're like, no, we don't. What do you mean? We don't have that. And so what I'm finding, I just wrote an article for the Soccer Coaches Association. I am absolutely connecting that to how lonely they are. Brene Brown talks about the fact that we use fitting in and belonging interchangeably, but fitting in actually gets in the way of belonging. They're not the same. And if you think about it, like from the standpoint of, if I show up to a classroom or if I show up to school and I feel like I have to act a certain way, and I think this has always been true of teenagers for sure, but like it's really prevalent now because of social media and how much that's kind of infiltrated their lives. If I feel like I have to show up and either leave part of myself alone or aside, or, just act in a certain way, I can't possibly belong because you can't possibly know me. And because they're so lonely, they're doing a lot of fitting in and they're not doing a lot of exposing themselves. And by the way, they've been forming their identity on different social media channels. And so we all code switch a little bit, but they all code switch a lot. And they have a lot of these identity. They have one identity on their Instagram. They have one identity on their fake Instagram, their Finsta account. They have one identity with their Snapchat friends. They have, so they have all of these different identities. And so in this time where they're trying to form their identity, they don't really have a lot of deep, close personal connections where they can truly be just who they are. They're always putting different masks on, and that it's actually more isolating, and it makes them more lonely. And they're so afraid of losing even the shallow connections that they have. They will never dive into deep conflict or any conflict because they don't want to lose the friend. In fact, if they feel conflict, what do they do a lot? They ghost, they peace out. They're so afraid of that uncomfortableness. They're just not, that's what it is. They're just not used to being uncomfortable, right? And so, but we know the longer you go and you get into your life, you know that your relationships actually can get deeper through conflict. And so I'm getting a lot of these teams, and I have a team that legitimately could win a national championship that I work with. And they want to do it while they want to do it while loving each other. And we have spent an entire semester redefining what that looks like. That doesn't look like kumbaya. It looks like, hey, you're not showing up the way that you said you were, and this bothers me. Can we have a conversation? I'm literally just having to sit them down and talk to them about having hard conversations, so that because they're so afraid of conflict with their peers, because they don't want to be more alone than they already feel. So that shallowness, and that's a big, big problem. So let me see the chat box. They're looking for connections. Yeah, but they don't know what to do. They just don't have the skill set to do it. And so I think that this has innately become part of our skill set. If you can work this in to the culture of your classroom, and here's one way to do it. I'll give you just a tool right now, since we're on it. If you can, this is what I do a lot with groups. Because they have just fewer repetitions having face-to-face conversations about real topics, and this is something I'm pulling from Growing Leaders, every single day, every single lesson, every single class period, I would take at least 5 to 10 minutes to have them do an off-subject group of 3 Q&A with their peers. And you may have them share out some of the discussion, or you may just have them do that and you're walking around and kind of, observing it. Those little connection points where they're talking to a peer face to face will just by themselves, not quickly, but over time, make them feel less lonely and give them more skills and repetitions of having face-to-face interaction. And it's feeding their soul in a way that when we have right now, nobody can make eye contact with each other because we're all looking at a screen. And so there's a chemical that gets released in your brain that's not being released, right? Through conversation, face-to-face conversation, the physiology of our brain actually changes the most. And especially in the section that controls emotion and is our decision-making section, our prefrontal cortex, they're getting a lot less of that. So physiology tells me that their brain is actually different. And so if we can have them do small group discussions about, just something random, like, hey, talk about one moment of joy yesterday. Share out for 5 minutes. Does anybody want to share? Oh, cool. Share with us. Yep. Little discussion ensues. Sweet. Today's lesson is this. If you do that, it's kind of like when you read a book and your vocabulary increases, but you don't feel it. That's what those little small group connections will do for your students. I see a hand up. Valerie, go ahead.
Yes, thank you so much. First, I'd like to thank you for the presentation. You are such an engaging speaker, and I love your presentation as you are touching on all very relevant points that I'm seeing. I am actually a physical education teacher inside of an elementary school in Southern Maryland. And so I am firsthand seeing all of these in the classroom. The thing that stuck out to me the most was the ability to broadcast their thoughts and emotions via social media or just on their phones, and now using their computers to do that as well. This has allowed them to just lose that ability to make those connections through social interactions face to face, rather than they're using their cell phones and social media to make those connections instead of with peers that are physically in their presence. And because of that, I am seeing a huge just social awareness, inability to have emotional regulation, and they don't know how to approach each other, constantly fighting. There's just this disconnect that we didn't have when we were growing up. And, I'm not entirely sure that the social emotional learning aspect of it inside the classroom is working or is as effective as it is intended to be. Doing my research, only 25% of our youth is actually latching on to that social emotional learning aspect that we are incorporating into our classrooms. So with that being said, I'm not even sure where to begin with how to begin making those milestones and those small steps towards bringing kids back to playing with each other and having those social interactions. And I really feel that the pandemic really caused for us to take 1,000 steps backwards with this.
I 100% agree with every single word that you just said. Thank you so much for sharing that. I don't have a hard, fast answer, except to say that if we go back to the model that I showed you a little bit ago for culture, I think that really is a model that we can use to guide us. And I do think in the exercise that I just talked about, I think firing up the hot prong and giving them practice, I would just encourage, and I encourage this of coaches, athletic coaches all the time, but I think it's the same in the classroom, regardless of the subject you're teaching. They will hear the words better coming out of our mouths and each other's mouths if they feel connected, but they don't have the tools and the skill set. I think the most important thing that you can work on in your classroom so that you can get to, the objectives in your curriculum is to get them to be able to have extra repetition in connecting with you and each other. And so I think establishing a habit of daily connection that's in person and a little bit uncomfortable. Going back to Brene Brown, she talks about the optimization of discomfort. The best learning happens in discomfort, but we have to get them to feel. I think the connection is the biggest carrot, but we can't tell them that that connection is only a carrot if they feel it. And so we have to be a little bit tricky to get them to do it. And that's where those small group discussions, if you can make them fun. I'll give you an example. So Tom, and by the way, I'm not like inventing any of this. Thomas Jefferson, one of the founding fathers, he used to do things, and I do this all the time with teams, something called the Jeffersonian dinner. And the last time I ran one was in Philadelphia with 60 soccer coaches, NCAA level soccer coaches. But they do it with their teams all the time. I don't know exactly what this looked like in a classroom, but I wonder if it's possible. I'll give you the gist behind it. The Jeffersonian dinner is just a certain way to have a dinner. And it's reportedly it was because Thomas Jefferson was hard of hearing and he wanted to have robust discussion. I mean, this was an exciting time. They were, he was one of the thought leaders that, helped us form our country. And apparently what they would do is he would pick an eclectic group from 6 to 8-ish type people and invite them over for dinner. And a week out, they got their first question. And when they all showed up, they would go around and answer the first question. But there was a couple of guardrails on this dinner. And it doesn't have to happen over food, but you could have a pizza day or whatever and do this. And it goes from fun to a little bit deeper in terms of the questions. But how it works is you're on the clock. And so there's one speaker at a time. So one person answers the first question and there's guardrails. There's no side conversations allowed and no asking questions of the speaker and taking over the conversation. So literally the person just speaks for 2 minutes and then the next person speaks for 2 minutes and so on and so forth, all the way around the table until that first question has been answered by everybody. And then the second question gets asked and so on and so forth. It's actually really cool. I'll give you an example of a good way. And you guys, you could all use this in your classrooms. just in a group of 3 discussion, if you, and this is just an example, you can make a million more like this. But one of the things that I would say is, the first question that I usually use is, if a walk-up song played every single time you entered a room or a building, kind of like when a baseball player, walks to the plate, or a volleyball player walks up to serve, like their walkout song, what would your walkout song be? And what does that say about you? And it's just a fun way to start. And if you give them like a week to answer that, they'll come with their phones and they'll play the song, and then they'll say, this is why, or whatever. And then, it goes on. And like, maybe the third question is, what's the nicest thing anyone's ever done for you? Usually that's the tearjerker round, right? And so basically we're just trying to get them to connect about something, like not about your subject at all, but just, we have to teach them to connect. And so, there's a billion different programs for social and emotional learning. And I think what happens is when they get enacted, and this is why I love Growing Leaders so much, as a social and emotional learning company, we use something called Habitudes, and they're literally images. They're images that form leadership habits and attitudes. Why are they images? Because we think in picture, because it's more engaging and it elicits both sides of the brain and it elicits emotion. We have to elicit their heart. It can't all just be academic. And we lose a lot along the way when we stick in the academic side. Right now, our kids need hope and they need inspiration. And then they need to feel less lonely. And they can only do that if you can help them lean into the discomfort, which we are, as human beings, we will all take the more comfortable route. That's why they will choose to interact over their phone when it's a hard conversation. But if we can give them repetitions with having real like about real topics, if we can make that part of the habit of our classroom, that is the biggest gift I can imagine getting to your students from your desk. It's more important than information right now, because this is an information, they're intellectually going to have access. They're going to be more intellectually advanced than any that went before them. So I don't know if that answers your question. I don't think there's one solid answer, but I do know we have to fire up the hot prong of connection first, and they're in dire need of it. So let me look at Janet's here. The point I was going to make is, well, when we see in the library after school our students who don't know how to really be in the same space with each other in a way that is conducive to making lasting relationships. Yeah. What do? They rip on each other. They spill tea about each other, right? Those are all fear-based responses. They've all been living in this uncertain time, and they missed a lot of socialization skills. So for sure. I'm just going through some of these other. Yep. Absolutely. Fitting in rather than having connections, hiding their true self out of fear, shallowness, and seeing it unfold throughout all areas of their adult life is sad and frustrating. Absolutely. Yeah. Before 2 o'clock, I will tell you this. Let me move forward in my presentation. All right. Does anybody have anything else they want to talk about on this slide before I move forward? Okay, let me just go here. And I will actually put something up. I think that you'll get the slide deck, but let me just, I can't, hold please. I'm struggling to move. There we go. I'm going to skip ahead and actually.
Not to interrupt, but I will send the person that was asking your information. I can send it to her if you want, but you put it up anyway. So there you go. There you go.
Perfect.
No problem.
So if you do have to hop off at 2, I am going to close up here pretty soon. And then I'm just going to open it up to anybody who wants to stay for Q&A, because I don't want to keep you indefinitely. But I do want to make one point. There's a book that Tim Elmore wrote, and it's called Generation Z Unfiltered. If you go to growingleaders.com, you will find a lot of free resources there, and it really is good stuff. So I do recommend it. One of the things that he, in his book, Generation Z Unfiltered, one of the third challenge that he unpacks is that sometimes part of the problem is our students get, they kind of have privileges without responsibility. And I just want to make a point about this word entitlement, because I think that part of the barrier for us connecting with our students is that they do feel really judged, and they are keenly aware of how we're feeling about them in a way, like if you haven't heard of the Rosenthal study, please go ahead and look it up, or Tim talks about it in this book as well. And it's basically talking about the narrative of teachers and how impactful that is on the development and the growth of the students. And what I see a lot from educators, and rightfully so, and I've been in this place, so I do get it. I'm not judging anybody, because I know that there's never been a harder time, in my opinion, to be an educator. But when we feel, I think this word entitled has been weaponized, and our students feel it. And so I just want to point this out. We all kind of feel a little bit entitled in this country right now, like in Western civilization, I think as a whole. So like we all feel entitled to things like indoor plumbing and electricity, or heating and air conditioning, right? Or good customer service, or high-speed internet and technology, right? And sometimes we can feel entitled to perks like trophies and awards. I know this. When I turn the light switch on, I highly feel entitled for my lights to go on. However, I also realize, because I didn't grow up with the phone and access to everything and complete anonymity in my entertainment choices, which they have, by the way. They don't have to go to the movie rental store and rent a movie and have to realize, like, have to hand it to mom or dad to rent it, or hand it to the clerk. There's a little bit of like a social element to that, right? They have complete access to everything and complete anonymity in their choices. And that really does take away something we call directive barriers from kind of directing their whatever. So because I didn't have that, because I had real social norms and things to follow, and there was civilization around how I communicated because it was out in public, I realized that I have to pay the light bill in order for the light switch to work, right? And I think that's a really important note, because there's an inverse relationship between three things that I know you're seeing a lack of in your students. Entitlement and resilience has an inverse relationship. Think about it. If I just expect everything to eventually come to me, what is there to bounce back from, right? If I expect everything to be handed to me, what is there to be grateful for? And most importantly, and most depressingly, if I expect everything to come my way, what is there to get super happy about? So everything's just meh with this generation, right? And so I wanted to point this out because I just want you to start rethinking that word entitlement and to reverse this inverse relationship. This is a point that Tim Elmore makes in his book, and I think it's really, really good. They need some greater responsibility so they can experience the gratitude for what they already have. And this is the way to get to it. If you do nothing else with your students, but help them connect in those groups, the three that I talked about, and then help them realize the rights that they get, the things that they get in their lives, or the things that they're experiencing, the ability that they have to go to school, it has a corresponding responsibility. They have some responsibility in the things that they're doing. And I think that sometimes we forget, we think that that should be obvious. However, metacognition is really down. And why is it down? Well, because when we get done with class, we don't think about, metacognition is just a fancy way of saying thinking about thinking. There's not as much of it because we fill our time with phones, with texting, they check their social media feed, they get sucked into TikTok reels or whatever, right? And so there's not a lot of thinking about that last interaction that happened. And so if we can help them just realize what they did to get XYZ, and how that they had some responsibility in them being able to be in the third grade, they had to pass the second grade, right? If we can help point that out for them, I think that will go a long way in reducing the entitlement level. And that's important to me, not because it's annoying, but because when they feel more entitled, they feel less grateful, they feel less happy, and they feel less resilient, and they are less resilient. And I know that that's a really important thing. So with that, I want to start to close out, and I want to tell you this story. And I think this story is as much for your heart as it is just to help you rethink your paradigm, your story that you make up about this generation. And it's the story of this guy. He's actually from my home state of Michigan. I didn't know that until the last few years. He's from Port Huron. And as a young kid, he got sent home from school and he had a note pinned to his shirt. And he gets home And his mom looks at him and she was like, Tommy, I don't know if his mom called him Tommy. I'm making that up in my head. I like to see the scene, but she's like, what is that note? And he said, I don't know. It's for you. They just told me to get it to you. And so she took it off his shirt and she opened it up and she read it and she started bawling. And little Thomas Edison was like, well, Mom, what's wrong? And so she read the note to him and it said, your son is a genius. The school is too small for him, doesn't have enough good teachers to train him. Please teach him yourself. And so she did. Whatever Thomas Edison as a young child, was curious about, she fed that curiosity. Somewhere in there, they moved to Ohio and that's where he was mostly raised. And she really did. She homeschooled him. And she pumped him with that narrative this whole time, like, you're a genius, you're a genius, you're a genius, you're a genius. And she gave him the opportunity to explore the things that he was really interested in.